All right. Well, thanks everyone for hopping on today for our monthly webinar at the Firearms Research Center. My name is Ashley Lubinsky. I'm the executive director. And today we have Tara Evans with us. She is the vice president and general counsel of the University of Wyoming. I almost said vice principal. That wasn't right. Tara is a Wyoming native. She has a bachelor's degree in molecular biology from the University of Wyoming and a law degree from the College of Law at UW. Tara joined the legal staff at the University of Wyoming as an associate general counsel in 2008. In February of 2017, she was named general counsel, and in 2019, she was named vice president. Prior to working for the university, Tara was a law clerk in the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and an associate attorney general in the Water and Natural Resources Division of the Wyoming Attorney General's Office. Tara has a strong interest in and passion for constitutional law, including freedom of expression, Second Amendment rights, and equal protection. So today, Tara is going to talk a little bit about HB 172, which was passed, which has an impact on the University of Wyoming campus. If you weren't around in the fall, there was a lot of conversation about permitting carry inside the buildings on campus at UW. And then in the most recent legislative session, there was a bill that was passed. And so I'm just going to let Tara kind of talk about what that was, how that impacts the university. As always, we have a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. So when Tara's done, if we've got time, I'll open that up, put some questions, and I will read those to Tara. So take it away.
Ashley, thank you. And so I always find these webinars interesting because I can't see you all. I can only see myself. But I'm so excited that you guys are here with me. This has been a pretty hot topic for campuses lately. And as Ashley said, we kind of went through a bit of a interesting time last semester as the university was trying to get its own rule going. It didn't actually get that rule passed, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Anyway, I'm excited to be here. As Ashley noted, I've been at the university for 16 years, general counsel for about 9, and vice president for 6. I'm going to give a little background on kind of what I do as a general counsel, and then I'm going to talk about constitutions and statutes, U.S. and Wyoming, related to campus carry. Kind of set the stage. You all probably know all of this stuff, but I'll set the stage for kind of the landscape in Wyoming and the university now with the new rule. And then I'll open it up for questions. So for those of you who are general counsels, it's like a broad civil practice. I coordinate and supervise all legal services for the university. I provide legal guidance. I try to reduce exposure to risk on campus. I'm kind of a strategic thought advisor for the president, the board of trustees. I advise on governance issues. Who's my client, right? That's always the tricky one. The university is my client. So I provide legal services sort of from the top to the bottom, the board of trustees, the president, university officers, deans, department heads, other representatives. But what if you have an adverse position, for example, between the president and the board? Well, then I advise the board. So it's kind of tricky there. I do provide legal advice to any employee acting within the scope of their duties. I can't provide, obviously, personal advice to individuals. Okay, like I said, broad civil practice. We do give a lot of legal advice all day long. I should say I have, let me think, I think I have 5 full-time attorneys, and then I have several that are half-time because they join another unit and work for another unit as well as me. So I probably have about 9 attorneys that work for me. I communicate with the Attorney General's office. I'm actually a special Attorney General. I have to be designated that to provide advice to a state entity. We do contracts and agreements. We do copyright and trademark, discrimination and harassment, employment law, ethics, conflict of interest, IP. Obviously, we do litigation, subpoenas, government investigations. We house all of the university regulations, so we have some authority and influence over policy development. We do all sorts of public records. As you can imagine, we get about 200 public records requests a year. We protect and help with student educational records requests. Obviously, I do a lot of First Amendment law, freedom of expression. And as all of you know, we're in quite, I'll say, polarizing times. So lots of First Amendment issues I deal with in my office. And then, of course, Second Amendment. And again, I'm a big proponent of it. And my work is trying to get universities and other governmental bodies to sort of understand the nuances of Second Amendment. A lot of regulatory compliance I do on campus. We have animal use, we have human subjects research, export control, conflict of interest. I do a lot of ADA stuff, OSHA, of course, safety. We have radiation safety. Of course, then we have all the discrimination regs, Title 6, 7, 9, which are hotly debated right now. So we're working through all of that and the new guidance from the federal government. But let's get to the topic at hand. So the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Again, most of you are probably lawyers. You have this base knowledge, so I'll just go over it briefly. Right? What does the Constitution states? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So then you have the New York State rifle case, which held that the constitutional right to bear arms in public for self-defense is not a second-class right, subject to an entirely different body of rules than the other Bill of Rights guarantees. So it's paramount in American law, right? But it's not unlimited. So the court in Heller said that it doesn't allow citizens to carry weapons anywhere for any purpose. And for example, government buildings and schools. But this is kind of what's being debated right now, right? This is being refined in states. More and more universities are being challenged for their rules and are having to open up their campuses to carry. So it's just a really interesting debate over that one decision that said it's not unlimited. So then what does that mean, right? Well, it's kind of like they're kind of called slangly sensitive places, right? So in Digiacinto, that case in the Virginia Supreme Court held that George Mason University is a sensitive place. So the court noted statistics like 30,000 enrolled students ranging in age from 16 to a senior citizen, 350 in an incoming freshman class would be under the age of 18. Campus is used by elementary and high school students attending summer camps. They have a preschool. And so all of those factors played into that court saying that a university in general is a sensitive place. And I think what we're finding out now is they are really limiting and narrowing that. So we have, of course, the Federal Gun-Free Zone Act, right, which prohibits firearms in K through 12 school zones and federal buildings, such as post offices and courthouses. Defines a school zone. It talks about it being 1,000 feet of ground kind of around it and all the public roads and sidewalks within that 1,000-foot buffer zone. But what some people don't know and what it's really important to remember is that there is an exception allowing the carrying of firearms for those who have a concealed firearm permit licensed from the state in which the school zone is located. So even though we may have a school on our campus, for example, there has always been that exception for a concealed firearm permitted person. And that part tends to get overlooked. All right, Wyoming Constitution. So as you all probably know, the Wyoming Constitution also expressly references gun rights for the citizens of the state, right? Article 1 talks about the right of citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and of the state, and that shall not be denied. That language is pretty similar to the US Constitution. Interestingly, affirmatively includes the phrase in defense of themselves. However, even with that additional language, the Wyoming courts have sort of held that the Wyoming's Declaration of Rights is parallel to the Second Amendment. So, consistent with some of the limitations listed in the Heller case, Wyoming courts have held that Wyoming statutes prohibiting the carrying of a concealed weapon are permissible and consistent with the state constitution. Here's a quote. Court has said, a balance must be struck between the individual's right to exercise each constitutional guarantee and society's right to enact laws which will ensure some semblance of order. So while the rights of individuals to carry firearms within the state are protected by the constitutions, again, the courts have said the rights are not limitless. However, I will point out in Wyoming, we have a very strong preemption statute, right? Wyoming statute 6-8-401, and it states that the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental right. It affirms this right as a constitutionally protected right in every part of Wyoming. And it clarified before this year that only the state could regulate the sale, transfer, purchase, delivery, taxation, manufacture, ownership, transportation, storage, use, and possession of firearms, weapons, and ammunition. That term there, state, is key, because what they did this year is they changed it to legislature. And that's important, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes, because the university has called itself the state, right? We're a constitutionally established entity of the state of the Wyoming, and that is the way the university asserted their power and ability to prohibit guns on campus. Well, that changed in the legislative session. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, well, let's talk about, Wyoming's pretty unique in that we have open carry. And I think a lot of people, you guys know this, but a lot of people that maybe don't, look at the Second Amendment every day, don't realize that there's a difference between open carry and concealed carry. And in Wyoming, you can open carry anywhere. There's no specific prohibition on it. So individuals who can possess a firearm can carry without much limitation. So this is anywhere, open carry anywhere. Wyoming still does regulate concealed carry. Some may say, why would they do that? Obviously, it's nice to be able to get a permit, a concealed carry permit, so you can have reciprocity in other states and other things like that. So, sorry, lost my thing here. There are two types, of carry, concealed carry in Wyoming, right? There's ones where you need a permit, but you can also constitutionally carry. It's called permitless carry, right? And so in Wyoming, you don't actually have to get the permit as long as you meet those 9 distinct items, which we'll talk about in the statute. You can constitutionally carry and not have the permit with you. Again, why do you want the permit? Maybe you want reciprocity in another state or something like that. So in Wyoming, concealed carry, you can do permit, you can do constitutional, or you can do open. So like I just said, you need 9 distinct standards to get a permit, a concealed carry permit in Wyoming. You have to be a legal resident of Wyoming for 6 months prior to the application. You have to be 21 years of age. I will note that in the session, they did try to bring a bill forward that would have reduced that to 18. That did not pass. Number 3, you have to not suffer from a physical infirmity, which prevents the safe handling of a firearm. Number 4, you cannot be ineligible to possess a firearm pursuant to a federal statute, which is a convicted felon or a fugitive or a user of controlled substances, for example. So you cannot be a felon. You have to have not been committed to a state or federal facility for the abuse of a controlled substance within 1 year prior to the application. You cannot chronically or habitually use alcohol, liquor, and malt beverages. You have to demonstrate familiarity with the firearm. That's number 7. Number 8, you cannot currently be adjudicated to be legally incompetent. And number 9, have not been committed to a mental institution. So if you meet all of those 9 standards, then you can get a permit. But again, Wyoming also allows for the permitless carry, so you don't actually need that piece of paper in Wyoming. All right, I'm going to jump to the university. What do we do here? So again, I've been here, but here's some of the rules that preceded me even. So prior to 1994, there were no Wyoming state laws addressing the presence of firearms on the university's campus. So in 1994, the Wyoming legislature enacted 6-8-104, specifically TX, which specifically prohibits any person from carrying a concealed weapon into any university facility, keyword, I'll come back to that, facility, without the consent of the university by and through its security service. Okay, so since 1994, you could not take a concealed carry weapon into any university facility. You would have to go to PD. You'd have to, if you wanted an exception to that, you would have to go to UWPD and likely explain a health or safety reason you needed to have a weapon on campus. But the year after that, so 1995, the Wyoming legislature enacted 6-8-401. That's the preemption statute, right? That's the one that says the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental right. And it's constitutionally protected in every part of Wyoming. And that is where it clarified that only the state can regulate, right? So suddenly you have a very, very strong preemption statute saying only the state can regulate, but you still have the concealed carry statute that says you cannot concealed carry to a university campus. So in 2007, the university, this was prior to my time, actually updated a regulation to prohibit what they called dangerous weapons. And that included firearms from being stored or carried in or on university facilities, including university grounds. So it upheld sort of the concealed carry statute, but it had added an additional point, which is you can't conceal carry on the university grounds and you can't open carry. So that was new. The university actually explicitly prohibited those three areas in 2007. You might say, how? What about the preemption statute? Well, I mentioned earlier that the university considers itself an arm of the state, and the preemption statute said the state can regulate. So they prohibited that. I will tell you in 2016, the university regulation, they narrowed it, the Board of Trustees, to prohibit firearms only within university facilities, not on the grounds. So then the rule got a little bit narrower there. So since 2016, you have been able to, you as a citizen have been able to, or me as an employee, carry openly or concealed on our grounds, just not in our buildings. All right, well then we got a lawsuit, right? Some of you probably know this, Williams versus University of Wyoming Board of Trustees. This is all public information. So that regulation that said you cannot carry into a university facility was challenged in 2018. There was a Wyoming Republican convention held at the university's conference center. The person of interest was Lyle Williams. He was in attendance as a delegate from Uinta County. He openly carried a firearm. He was approached by law enforcement officers from UWPD, asked to relinquish his firearm pursuant to the reg. He made it clear he was challenging the legality of the regulation. He said he would not give up his firearm, and he was asked to leave the facility. He again refused, and so was cited for misdemeanor criminal trespass. I will tell you that at the time, the UWPD that was on the ground managing the situation only cited one person. There were several that were carrying, they only cited the one, and they didn't actually kick anyone out. They just cited them for trespass because they wouldn't leave. So Williams brought a lawsuit against the university, challenging our ability to regulate the carrying of firearms on campus. And in our defense, and at the direction of the Board of Trustees at that time, we filed a motion for summary judgment. So we argued that due to the university's treatment as the state, like I said before, in other situations, similarities with two other state entities who regulate firearms within their facilities. We also relied on prior legislative service office interpretations of 6-8-401 and the Board of Trustees plenary power under the Wyoming Constitution. We argued that the university was an arm of the state and was not preempted. The case was actually initially decided for the university on summary judgment. Mr. Williams appealed, and the Supreme Court reversed the lower court's decision on procedural grounds, remanded with direction to dismiss the case. Williams chose not to refile, so as it stands, unfortunately, we have no decision from the Wyoming Supreme Court related to our ability, the university's ability, to regulate firearms in university facilities. Okay, so we're going to come back to that case, but a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit about other state laws right now. And okay, so 10 other states that I know of have statutes that require over 300 public colleges and universities to allow campus carry. So 10 states, 300 public colleges and universities. And that includes Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Kansas, Mississippi, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And I believe, maybe I need to update this, Arizona had a bill being debated in the current session, and that would have added an additional 25 schools to that list. So our good friends to the south, our rivals, CSU, they have a really interesting story about campus carry. So in 2009, CSU was sued by its students over the legality of its 1994 firearms policy, same year as the policy that came into effect for the University of Wyoming. So that policy prohibited the carrying of any kind of firearm on campus unless carried by a law enforcement officer or with the permission of the campus chief of police. Any student found possessing a firearm was subject to expulsion. So they sued. They argued that based on the language of the Colorado Concealed Carry Act, CSU did not have the authority to regulate firearms on campus. But the court found that the language of the act divested CSU of its authority to regulate concealed handgun possession on campus. So they go from having a rule that says no guns to having the court say, no, you can't regulate concealed handguns. But then in July 1st, July 1st, 2024, the Colorado legislature enacted a statute 18-12-105.5, which bans possession of firearms on university property. So they went from one place to another and back again. So now they are not included in the list of campuses where you can carry right now. Utah, let me talk a little bit about Utah. It's probably the most similar to Wyoming. It has aspects of open carry in it. I haven't found that anywhere else. So, excuse me, sort of similar to the proposed legislation in Wyoming last year, the Utah legislature has preempted all authority to regulate firearms on a university campus. So only the legislature can regulate firearms in Utah. They created this new legislation in 2004, which prohibited state and local entities from enacting or enforcing any ordinance, regulation, rule, or policy that in any way inhibits or restricted the possession or use of firearms on either public or private property. Okay. University of Utah sued the state of Utah. I'll tell you what, I'm glad that wasn't me. I'm not sure I'd ever want to be the general counsel of the university if we sued our own state. But they did. So they're sort of, the university argued they had a longstanding policy that prohibited firearms. They are this is a quote, an autonomous constitutional entity. This was their argument, with the authority to disregard Utah law that interferes with its internal academic affairs. A very interesting argument. They used the word disregard. State, of course, argued no. The university is subject to the state law like anyone else. They have no separate power or autonomy under the state constitution. And then the Utah Supreme Court agreed with the state and the attorney general. So in 2013, state law was created stating that only those with concealed weapons permit may carry on Utah higher education campuses. So this is a change. They actually narrowed it a bit and said that you can only carry with a permit. That's important because that's kind of where I'm going to get to with Wyoming, is even though you can open carry in Wyoming and you can constitutional carry in Wyoming, the new law only allows permitted carry on our campus. So it's a little different. Okay. Well, like sort of that's my background. Let me turn a little bit to Wyoming and what we're doing here. So in last year's session, not this year's, in 2024, the repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendments was House Bill 125, was passed by both houses. but vetoed by Governor Gordon on March 22nd, 2024. The bill would have permitted that anyone lawfully carrying a concealed weapon could do so at, quote, any public school, public college, or university athletic event taking place on public property that does not sell alcoholic beverages, and any public college or university facility. It also changed that important language in the preemption statute. It changed it from the state can regulate to only the legislature can regulate. So had that gone through last year, the university would not have been able to uphold its regulation anymore. Again, we argued in Williams, because it was the previous language, it was the state, that we were a constitutionally established entity of the state. We were the state, we had the right to regulate. That this law last year would have changed that. Okay, now back to what the governor did. He vetoed the bill, but his veto memo reinforced his support for the Second Amendment. He advocated for firearm freedom. He said that his veto was not based on an opposition to repealing gun-free zones, but rather that he viewed the legislation as the erosion of local control norms. And it was giving sole authority to the legislature to micromanage a constitutionally protected right. He also stated that the bill as enacted would augment the legislature's reach into local firearms regulation and extend the separation of powers of the Wyoming Constitution. So at the time, the governor said, he kind of called on us. He said, school districts, community colleges, University of Wyoming, please take up these difficult conversations again. And please establish policies that allow for the safe carry of concealed weapons within their facilities. Okay, that was last year. So to comply with that directive, the university's Board of Trustees reviewed a proposed rule at its November 2024 meeting, so this past November, that would have allowed for concealed carry in university facilities with certain exclusion. As Ashley kind of pointed out, the Firearms Research Center actually helped us with this. We set up a bunch of town halls, Q&A sessions. We did a community survey. As you can imagine, it was quite emotional for people. This is an issue, I've known this, but it's quite polarizing for people. And you have a lot of people who very much want to protect Second Amendment rights, including on a campus. And then you have a lot of people who are saying, no, a campus is unique, we're sensitive, we have a lot of elements, we had a lot of young students, a lot of people in those sessions cited suicide rates. And they were pretty adamant that the Board of Trustees should not allow guns on campus in any form or fashion. They were pretty passionate. And so they brought forward their statistics and their arguments, and there was some real emotion about this issue. So after all of that, the board put it to a vote, and it was a 6-5 vote to not modify the total ban. So essentially they upheld our regulation that said no guns on campus at all. But it was a 6-5 vote. It was quite close. It was quite hotly debated. Okay, but that all changed, right? Because this March or this February, this year's repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendment state law, which is House Bill 172. Actually, let me check that title. I think it was the same thing. Yes, repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendments, House Bill 172. That passed. So just last month, the Board of Trustees in their March meeting had to modify their regulation to sort of meet that law, right? So right now, as it stands, they voted this, so effective first, they are continuing to prohibit open carry of firearms in university facilities. Not on the grounds though, okay? So on the grounds, again, since 2016, you've been able to carry. They referenced the concealed firearm pursuant to Wyoming Statute 6-8-105. They clarified that this prohibition against dangerous weapons, which includes firearms, does not apply to the university apartments. Now I'm going to get into that a little bit below, but we do have apartments on the campus, and we are not restricting what you do in those apartments. And then it is going to require the use of a concealed biometric firearms storage container or lockbox when the concealed firearm is not being carried and concealed on a person. So the statute, or the House Bill 172, stated that we may permissive require a lockbox, and the board decided that they would actually put that in their regulations. So that is a requirement if you can't conceal on a person. I'm going to tell you why that's important. What about when you're in the gym? What about when you're showering? So that is why I think they put that rule forward. All right, what does that mean for the University of Wyoming? So they, if you go to our reg, I think it was maybe handed out to you guys as a resource. You'll see a redlined reg. It's actually pretty short, and they didn't change much of the regulation. They just wanted to refer to the statute. And so we created a pretty extensive FAQ document. I also think you guys have access to that. If not, you can certainly get it afterwards. We're posting it publicly, and it goes over a lot of different scenarios. I stole a little bit of this from Texas. They have a really nice campus carry page that I was able to take some of their questions from, because they've been doing this for years. So we kind of tried to go over every scenario that might come up so that people kind of can digest this a little bit and understand it before it goes into effect on July 1st. Again, if you were to look at campus, while let me back up. We did have a survey. I think this is important to understand. So we did a survey last semester of all of our campus community members, actually, and even the public. And of course, surveys, you never know how reliable those are, but it did show a range. And we tried to ask a question of, okay, open carry, concealed carry, or complete ban. And I will say the overall number was somewhere around 60%. If you put all the groups together, 60% said, no, you need to keep the ban. But if you break it down by category, it's really interesting, because the faculty were somewhere like 80% that they agreed we keep the ban in place, right? Then staff was lower than that. The students were about even. They were 50-50. So interestingly, I think that shows an interesting demographic and an interesting statistics, because they were split half and half. Okay, that just sets the stage for, there's a lot of work for us to do on campus to help people understand that this law, in our opinion, is not going to create a safety issue. At every other campus that has done this, we have not found any increased crime, any increased safety issues. And so we're working really hard with UWPD to kind of do an educational tour so they can see and understand why we feel that way, and ask questions. So I'll go over a few of the interesting FAQs with you guys. And then, in a few minutes here, we can open it up to your questions if you want. But so what do we put in them, right? We have general information, like what it takes to be eligible, those 9 distinct standards. We put that in there. We talk about the difference between permitted carry and constitutional carry. And we remind everyone that on the university campus, and this is by statute, it's only permitted carry. Now, a key piece about this is because we get these questions like, well, can I ask someone? You cannot, right? By law, you're a gun owner, whether you have a concealed carry permit, that's protected. So no, I cannot go and ask that person whether they're carrying a gun or whether they have a permit. The only reason that would come into play is if they violated something. So if they were open carrying in a facility, for example, PD could go, they could approach them and say, hey, let's have an educational moment about this. So I bring that up because there's a difference in the 2024 statute that was proposed in the 2025 one. The 2024 statute they did not carve out open carry. So it would have been a really interesting dynamic, because we would have had open carry everywhere. Facilities, grounds, all events would have been open carry. And then they would have had this unique concealed carry rule where you could conceal carry in certain places, but not other. Pretty odd. So this year, lawmakers kind of fixed that by clarifying that the university could still regulate open carry. So that is why the university chose to still say no open carry on campus, except for your grounds. So no open carry in facilities, but you can concealed carry per the statute. So I think that's an important distinction. Okay, what else did we do in the FAQs? We listed the exclusion zones. These are interesting, right? So there used to be more exclusionary zones prior to this year's statute. They kind of narrowed them to be a lot smaller, but some of them still exist. So I'll quickly go through kind of the exclusion zones here. Law enforcement facilities, those are still excluded. We do have our own law enforcement unit, right? So we have the University of Wyoming Police Department. They're full officers. They're not security personnel. They get trained. Actually, by the way, I'm really proud of them. They are an amazing police force. They work with us so well. They're phenomenal clients. I have a lot of clients and they're one of my favorites. So I just wanted to call them out. But okay, so you can't carry in law enforcement facilities. Detention facilities. One might say, what does that have to do with UW? Well, we actually have a moot courtroom. It's in our College of Law. Some of you may have seen it. Actually, I think we had a webinar or one of these put on by Ashley was in the College of Law. So we have a moot courtroom and it has a little holding cell there in that courtroom. So that's actually covered. You can't carry there. You also can't carry in courtrooms. So again, we have a courtroom and sometimes the Supreme Court, or I think the Court of Appeals has come as well, actually as an educational tool for students, actually come and hears their cases in those courtrooms. Some of you may have argued in them. So you can't carry there. But we did have to clarify if the courtroom is being used as a classroom, not a courtroom, you can still carry. So we put that in our FAQs. Okay, another exclusion. Portions of establishments licensed to dispense alcohol. Okay, what does that mean for UW? We have what's called the Pokes Pub in the Union. So there's a little bar down there, some pool tables. You can't carry there. We also serve alcohol in football games and basketball games. You can't carry there. Now I'm going to give you a nuance. I think the university houses like the high school competitions sometimes. Well, we don't serve alcohol during those competitions. So technically you can carry during those competitions. The only time you can't carry, remember it's concealed carry only, is if the alcohol is being served. Okay. What's another example? Health service settings. Sorry, that's an exclusion. Health service settings. So we have a lot of those on campus, as you can imagine. We have the student health service. We have 3 family practice residencies we run. So Casper, Laramie, Cheyenne. We have multiple mental health services units, counseling units. So in those units, handguns are not allowed. Oh, that's another thing I should say. You guys already probably know this, but it's only concealed carry of handguns. You cannot try to conceal carry your rifle. I've had a lot of questions from students about this. So that didn't change. So right now, if you want to have your hunting rifle, for example, on campus while you're in the dorms, you have to store it at PD or at home or in your car. That didn't change, right? You can't conceal carry a rifle. So it's only handguns. Another exception, the university's Early Care and Education Center. That's, we call it the ECEC. It's basically our preschool, our daycare. That was also excluded. So you cannot carry in the Early Care and Education Center. And then the last exclusion are facilities where explosive or volatile materials are present. So we got a lot of that. We have over 600 labs at the university. I will tell you not all 600 of them have explosive materials, but a handful of them do. So those will be covered. And the way we're kind of dealing with this is we know the labs that have those materials, but we are saying if you have it and you want to be excluded, come tell us and then we'll make sure. I'll tell you, I've gotten interesting questions. Faculty have said, great, I'll just put explosive materials in my office and then you can't carry in my office. You could, but I will tell you, I think that violates another university regulation that says you can't have explosive materials in your office. So I don't think that would work for them. It did make me chuckle. So, okay. Let's just talk, see, I want to leave 15 minutes for questions. So I got about 4 more, Ashley. I'll keep going for a minute here. What does this mean for the residence halls? So in our rule last November that the university proposed, which again was voted down, It actually carved out the residence halls, but this statute does not. So as long as you're 21 and you have that permit, you can carry in the halls. Well, it has to be concealed on your person, or else you have to have a firearm storage container. Likely you're gonna have to have one. I can't even imagine, well, I could imagine, but you probably cannot conceal that in the shower or while you're sleeping. So most people who carry in the halls will have to bring or get their own firearm storage container. Like I said before, the apartments are different. That's your home. That's sacrosanct. So we're not restricting the apartments. You can house your hunting rifles in the apartments, right? There is no restrictions there. All right, what about half acre? That's our gym. Are you going to carry in our gym? Well, you can technically per the law, but if you can't conceal it, then you have to have a firearm storage container. And we don't have any firearm storage containers, so you'll have to either bring one or you will need to leave your gun, in your dorm room while you're lifting. So again, technically you can have them in half acre, except for there is one wellness center area, and that would be covered under the health service settings, so you can't have it in that building. A lot of people have said, well, what if the building has two purposes? Well, of course, we're going to narrowly construe it. So we do have this. We have the Student Health Service, which shares a building with the Cheney International Center. Well, you can carry on the Cheney half. You cannot carry on the Student Health Services side, and we will very narrowly construe that. So for example, our psychology clinic is like a room on a floor. Well, it's only covered for the room, not the entire building. What about a field trip? So yep, we take a lot of field trips. We have a lot of work in the field by our graduate students. You can carry there, you can concealed carry there. But we are trying to caution people, careful, you need to know the law of where you're going. Because if you're going to enter federal land, you might not be able to carry. And so it's on you to make sure that if you're going to conceal carry under our rule, it still meets the rules of the location you're going to. Okay, what about university vehicles? Yes, per this new rule, as long as it's concealed, you can carry. Can you carry in your purse? That's an interesting question. The law doesn't say. So yes, as long as it's concealed, I suppose you can carry it in your purse. Okay, what do you do? A lot of people are saying, what do I do if I see a gun? Well, while on campus, if you see a gun on the grounds, that's legal. It's been legal since 2016. So if you see a gun outside, nothing much for you to do. If you see, for example, a gun in your office, in your classroom, in your research lab, or wherever, technically it's supposed to be concealed. So yes, please call PD. We're encouraging people not to approach people. Most people who are legally carrying and show, it's just going to be a accident. They don't mean to show, like their coat lifts up, right? So PD is going to have an educational moment with them. There could be some bad actors. There could be some legal gun owners who say brandish their gun or something. Well, they can't do that, right? So call PD. PD will come in and talk to them. And then, of course, if there's a threat, which we don't think this law will increase the threat, but if there is a threat by someone, of course you call PD, and they will come and assist. Okay. So I'm going to end and then open it up for questions here. I'm going to end by stating, right, Second Amendment is paramount to American law, right? You have an absolute right to defend yourself. Universities have kind of long battled this right because of the notion that they think they're a sensitive place, right? We've got preschoolers, we've got elementary kids coming on and off, we have a lab school on campus, we have mental health facilities, we have explosive materials, we have sporting events, all of that. So it's been this battle for a while, but there's this shift. It's happening nationwide. It's happening with gun rights. It's happening with the First Amendment. It's happening with DEI, with equal rights. And we're kind of slowly seeing more and more universities getting challenged with their gun rules. I have been in Wyoming my whole life. I actually thought it would be challenged prior to this. I'm surprised I've made it to I'll tell you my age, 44th year, and it hasn't been challenged before then. But here we are. We're committed to keeping a safe environment here. We're committed to educating people on their rights. And so that's kind of where we're in the middle of right now. So again, thank you, Ashley, for inviting me. It's a good day when I get a lecture on the Second Amendment instead of some of the other sensitive things I deal with. And shout out to Professor Moxery. He's a good friend and colleague of mine. And should we open it up to questions?
Sure thing. We have a question already. It says, excuse me. To confirm, my understanding is that a reciprocal concealed carry permit, say one issued by Montana and recognized by Wyoming, is not covered by the HB 172 exception allowing permitted concealed carry on campus.
That is correct. So that is, I should have gone over that. You can get reciprocity in Wyoming, but not on the university campus. You have to have a Wyoming issued permit.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions? Again, the Q&A feature is just kind of down. I think it should be down in the center of your Zoom screen. So we'll give it a couple minutes if you guys want to type some questions in. If not, we'll wrap early.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Will you be asking students/employees if they intend to have a firearm on campus with their concealed carry permit?
No. So per the law, we can't ask them. I think we can just try to educate and say, if you're going to bring a gun to campus or a firearm, here's the rules, make sure you follow them. The only time they'll be approached or asked is if they're violating something, and then PD will look at them. So, for example, in the residence halls, right, we've had our student affairs coordinators say, well, what do I do? Do I ask the student if they're going to have one? No, you can't. The student just has a right to have one. Now, if they're doing inspections and they see maybe a gun hanging out on a desk, that's not concealed, right? That would be a violation, but they can't ask other than that. I'll tell you, it's been, can you imagine our roommate situation? So we're trying to deal with roommates. Okay, what if you get a roommate that has one and you're not comfortable with that, right? Or we're just gonna use our dispute process. We will, we'll pair you up with someone, and then if you happen to get a roommate who is legally carrying a weapon, and you are frustrated with that, we will just sort of deal with that like we do any other dispute.
All right, next question. What is the rationale for allowing concealed carry but not open carry? As someone who favors more, not less gun restrictions, I would rather know who has a gun rather than one who does not. If I know if someone has one, I can leave the room if I choose not to be around someone with a gun. I don't have that choice if their gun is concealed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, actually. So it's a really interesting question, sort of why the state did it that way, right? Why did the state say you can only conceal carry on campus? Because I think some people would agree with that argument. Now, the university, I'll have to draw a line here, right? Because I'm the university's attorney, but the university board of trustees elected to still prohibit open carry and not concealed carry. And I think this is just, they're kind of baby stepping their way through this rule. So I would tell you that there may be a point in time that they go a different route, but at this point, they just went with the statutory requirement.
Next question. What is the effect of the federal school zone prohibitions on campus carry?
Yeah, so there's still the federal zone. We have a lab school right now. That, though, as you guys might know, was another contentious issue for us. And we had already given notice to that lab school that we would no longer have them on our campus as of August. That went through the state bill, hotly debated, and that bill did not pass. So as of August, we will no longer have an elementary school on campus. That being said, if we had one, we would have had to follow that preemption statute. So we would have had the school and the 1,000 feet around it. We would have followed that. And as a reminder, that gun allows for concealed carry. So honestly, it wouldn't have had much of an effect because we're kind of catching up to that law, sort of.
So the next question asks, what about ammunition in respect to this bill?
Yes. Good question. Okay, I gotta think on my feet. Oh gosh, okay, gosh, don't hold me to this, but I think what we're saying is you concealed carry and have ammunition. Don't hold me to that though. So sorry, I don't actually know. I got to figure that one out before July 1st.
What is the sanction for violation of the carry policy?
Yeah, good question. So we have different groups of people on our campus, right? We have employees, we have students, and we have visitors. So I'll go through each one. If a student violates the campus carry policy, they will be taken through what we call the student code of conduct. We have a student code of conduct, and there's a lot of violations, right? You can't disrupt the peace, you can't, deface property, stuff like that. So if they violate the campus carry rule, and that will have to go through PD. So PD will have to actually say, yes, they violated the rule. We would give them notice of an allegation of the student code, and they would get an entire process to go through that. If you're an employee, we have UW regulations that govern your conduct. We also have the employee handbook, and then we have your offer letter, of course. And so if you violate university policy, it depends on sorry, this is a long answer. It depends on your status as an employee. I'm at will, right? I'm at will. If I violated the campus carry policy, the president could say, you're out of here, Tara. If we have a classified staff member who violates it, they have property rights in their job. So they would get notice they would get to be heard, they would get a hearing, but we would definitely take them through that process. Now, what if it was just an accidental one? Okay, well, we're going to do progressive discipline, right? We're going to say, hey, reminder, if you have a concealed carry, you need to conceal it. And then if it was purposefully brandishing it, or if it was threatening, of course, we could jump straight to termination if we needed to. And then my last category, sorry, is visitors. We don't really have much authority over visitors, although we could trespass them. So if a visitor came on and violated campus carry, we could trespass them.
So the next question has the word facility in quotes, and it says a building where East Wing has hazardous materials and West Wing none. UW has decided the facility is not the entire building, and there was a question mark on the back of that.
That is correct.
All right. Will these rules apply to other dangerous weapons or just firearms?
Okay, let me parse that out. So our regulation, UW regulation 6-4, says that dangerous weapons are not allowed on campus. The only thing we're changing due to House Bill 172 is concealed carry of firearms. So I think I'll make sure I'm saying yes or no in the right way to that question, but we are not changing our rules on dangerous weapons. I think right now you can't have a blade over 3 inches. We're not changing that rule. You can't conceal carry a blade. So we're only changing the firearm rule.
And then the next question, UW says, quote, athletic training service areas, end quote, are not concealed carry. Can you explain again, is it a health and human services facility?
And maybe I need to look at those FAQs, but yes, the athletic training area is a health service setting. So you will not be able to carry a concealed weapon into the athletic training area.
And then I have a follow-up question, I believe. So let me make sure. Tara, not you, Tara. Tara, the person who typed the question. Let me know if I'm wrong, but she originally had asked the question. Let me scroll back up about asking employees and students if they intend to have a firearm on campus. And then she then asked, is this right in the new law or the Second Amendment? I think that if I'm reading that correctly, it would be to your answer that you can't do it. You can't ask the question. So I think that's what the follow-up is.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, it's a statute. It's a Wyoming statute. I don't have the number in front of me, but it's there's a Wyoming statute specifically stating that gun ownership and whether you have a permit is confidential by law.
And then did UW consider an affixed UW-owned storage container in the dorm rooms? Will you review/require a student-provided container for sufficiency?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually talked about it. For example, do we put some, firearm storage containers in half acre, right? Do we have them in the dorms? Do we have a whole bunch that we supply to students? Do we have them at student health services? Because I'll tell you, one of my worries is someone doesn't go there because they're carrying a weapon and it's an emergency and they're worried they're going to get in trouble, please go to student health services. You're not going to get in trouble. We'll house your weapon, temporarily while you're there. There's talk about it. There's a fiscal issue with that, right? I don't know if we're going to have the funds to be able to do that. So as of right now, we're basically saying you have to bring your own. And if you can't, then you might not be able to have it in that facility.
Excellent. Do we have any more questions? All right. I think we have answered all the questions. Thank you guys so much. Oh wait, I just kidding. So two came in, so I think we've got 2 minutes. And then it's these last two will be the last two questions. I was like, I knew I should have waited. I was like, how long do you wait to type? So here's one question. Oh, this one is you should ask, what about tanks? Can you have a tank on campus? If yes, great. If no, why is Frank the Tank allowed on campus?
So no, you cannot have tanks on.
And then the last question is, will you review require a student provided container? Oh, that we already had that one. It was just typed. But it might not have gotten answered in the last one, which was, will you review and require a student provided container for sufficiency? So if somebody has a container that they're putting their firearm in, will you have like a procedure for reviewing it to make sure it's
reviewing
sufficient?
it. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I did answer that piece. So we won't provide them, but if you bring one in yourself, I need to maybe work through that a little bit. I don't think we're gonna on the front end look at it. Like, I don't think we're gonna say, show us your container. But you must have one in your dorm room, for example. And so then if there's an inspection and someone sees it and says that doesn't meet it, it's not biometric or it's not locked or it's not secured, then we'll have to work with that person to get the right one. That could change though. I mean, maybe I'll work with student affairs, and when everyone incoming freshman comes in, right? The problem is I can't ask, right? I can't ask if you're going to have a gun. So all we can do is educate. So I kind of can't say, show me your lockbox. That will get tricky. So I think that we're going to just have to try to tell them to have one. And then if on inspection or if someone turns them in and it's not correct, we'll look at it.
I wonder if it's possible to have either, I don't know who it would come from, but if you can have a list of, approved storage, recommendations, like you get on a lot of the different kind of either, a lot of the different gun groups have recommendations for secure storage and that kind of thing. So I don't know if that would be something that would be appropriate.
Yes, that's a great idea. And so we actually talked sort of about that, but you said it better. So I think it'll be good that, because UWPD is going to put all this on their website. So I think it would be a great resource to kind of say, these are the storage containers that meet our rule, and here's where you can find them. I think a lot of local places actually carry them, or you can order them online.
Okay, perfect. And then we just had a follow up to that about TSA standards for storage, which I'll say that that is probably its own webinar.
Yeah.
In terms of firearms and TSA standards, because it's actually very, very complicated and may not actually be as secure as people think it might. Actually, there might be better ways to do it, but it is. Again, I'm in the wrong time zone. So it's 1:00. So we're gonna stop the questions there. Thank you so much, Tara. Thank you everyone that was listening to this webinar. I hope you guys have a good weekend, and we will be announcing next month soon. Thank you guys.